Welcome to another Thursday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm Yucca, and this week we are continuing the variety of topics that we've been doing for April. So this week I will be talking about pagan superheroes and in general paganism in comics, mainstream, in our fiction and drama that we have. So our question comes from Jessa Blake, and they ask, has there ever been a Wiccan / pagan superhero? I know the Tarot Witch was, and Wiccan from DC / Marvel world was just named Wiccan. There's gods and Dungeons and Dragons, and a lot of religion in Final Fantasy. But I want to know if there are Wiccan superheroes that use spells and tools and an altar. So I think I'm going to focus most of this talking about DC and Marvel. You guys didn't know, I'm a total nerd. So, but I do have to warn that this is a little bit Marvel centric because I'm more of a Marvel girl. Although there are some things in DC that I am okay with, but in general I think their females suck. Most of the time. Not that the characters necessarily do, but the way that they're written and the pretty big lack of them. With the exception of a lot of what almost anything Gail Simone has had her hands on, I think is actually quite excellent. I was a huge Birds of Prey fan. Birds of Prey fan. And some of, Alan Moore. There's a couple others in there, but for the most part, more of a Marvel person. So I'll start with DC. I think I didn't really come up, well, the thing about these worlds to start with is that these are worlds that the kind of flashy magic, right, the more Harry Potter style, the boo, there's fire and explosions, that's a world in which that kind of magic is real. And there's just no denying it. There it is. It's real, So there's very little, and that looks way cool. Like, people like that in terms of the drawing that and the pictures and if it's in an animated or live action format, like it's really exciting. So that gets done a lot. And so when magic is handled in these universes, these two different, they have multiple universes, but in these two different, let's just call them companies, most of the time it's handled with flash, bang, pow, and very little ritualistic kind of magic, which seems like the question I was asking about a little bit. And religion is really not usually dealt with. There's a lot of religious concepts going on. There's a lot of, kind of without being said, there's a lot of, morality and rules and all of that stuff, but they don't usually talk about religion as such. So I couldn't think of anybody who actually identified as being a Wiccan or pagan. This comment asks about Tarot Witch, which I've never actually read anything with, so I can't really comment on that character. But in DC, the closest thing I could think of is John Constantine. But one of the things about big companies like this that have multiple people who write characters is that the character can be very, very different depending on who writes it. So if you take, Alan Moore's Constantine, he's really different than some of the later kind of iterations of them. They're all really, really dark, so I wouldn't, if you're looking for something happy, I wouldn't read that, anything with him in it. But the way he was originally written, he was much more kind of doing a kind of ritual, quieter type of magic, and so more recent incarnations of him have been much more flashy, and he's kind of gone back into the magician, pow, bang kind of thing. Other than that, with DC, I can't really think of anybody Over on the Marvel side, the comment mentioned Wiccan, who, and I think somebody else brought up Scarlet Witch in their video. I haven't gotten a chance to really watch everybody's videos very much yet, but so both Scarlet Witch and Wiccan, who, you know, mother and son, are actually mutants. So that's not actually magic that they're using, except Wiccan has some later, like, Asgard weird stuff that I haven't caught up on or anything like that. But so again, magic really exists in that universe, but that's a universe where there are gods. And I keep saying universe, and I don't want any like hardcore fans to come after me and be like, there's actually multiple, I know, but I'm just trying to talk about it. And vocabulary is kind of hard with that. But it's a world where Thor is an undisputable existing entity in this world, as are the other Norse gods. Going back to how it's written, though, depending on which version you're reading or, you know, watching, because of the multiple animated Avengers and the new movie canon kind of treats them and says that, oh, they're just really advanced aliens that we mistake for gods, which is kind of the same strategy that a lot of, you know, Stargate, Star Trek, a lot of other, what do you call them? Fields, you know, series, whatever, have also handled it that way. But in some of the comics you read, like, oh, they're just straight up gods, that's what they are. So, kind of all over the place, but for Marvel and DC, I guess the summary is that I don't know of any actual practicing Wiccans or pagans. Characters really depend on who's writing them. Their personalities can be very, very different depending on that and what they actually do. Magic exists in these worlds, but they're usually flash, pow, or, you know, in like Wiccan's case, they're actually just mutants who are, it looks like what they're doing is magic. D&D, well, I mean, like, obviously, a lot of you can play D&D in any setting, but if we're going to talk about the settings that you find in the rule books in terms of, you know, what gods you have there, like Pagalore or anything like that, I mean, those are obviously pagan religions, if we use the sense of not being Abrahamic and being polytheistic. But it really just depends on the DM and how they're playing the game, on how big of a focus that is. Final Fantasy, I never got into. I can't really tell you anything about that. But I did want to touch on kind of some other places where it occurs in media. Normally I'm a huge Weed Knight, but I have to say that I thought that Buffy and by extension Angel handled Wiccanism or Wicca very poorly, because it pretended like it was something that it wasn't. And that's what a lot of kind of more current shows, I guess Charmed isn't even current anymore, but a show like that, like, I think does a very poor job because it's trying to make it into this something, you know, because they're making it for entertainment, and it would, in the show, be way more interesting if there's actual fire-throwing magic and, you know, stuff like that. Something that I think got it really well, while still very clearly being fiction, is the Dresden series. And I did see Kara had a comic book of the Dresden series in her video, and I'd never actually seen that. I've listened to all of them. I'm very excited for the next one coming out. And they are read by James Marsters, actually, the recorded version that you can get on Audible or wherever, and very good, very excited. But anyways, he isn't necessarily a Wiccan, but the author did a really good job on his research, Jim Butcher. So when you're reading through it, you're like, oh wow, well, let me back up. So Harry Dresden is basically a detective in sort of the old, 1940s detective novels, first person, very noir, in Chicago, modern day, or, for whenever it was written. So, 90s, 2000s. But magic exists, and he's a wizard. He's a private eye. He's a private detective wizard, and it's very, very silly sometimes, but it becomes incredibly epic. Really good story. But anyways, he deals with magic in a way that, he obviously did his research really well, and then there actually are characters who are Wiccans and pagans, and he handles it very respectfully and really well in the context of what he has. Ultimately, I think the best piece of fiction that I've ever seen or read or had access to that has what I think is a very realistic depiction of pagans would be The Fifth Sacred Thing. They aren't superheroes in the sense that, that we would tend to think of superheroes, but their characters are definitely heroes in that book, and so that's one that I would really advise for people to read. Isn't as super mainstream as something like DC or Marvel is, but it's really great. So, I think I've probably just rambled this whole video. I hope that there's something interesting in there.